She had exactly 4 minutes to live. That's what the man in the black gloves told her when he pressed the vial into her trembling hand in the basement of the Seo estate. 4 minutes from the moment the poison touched Seo Jinhyuk's lips. 4 minutes before the most powerful, most feared, most devastatingly beautiful man she had ever known would be dead. And she would be the one who killed him. Adaeze Mensah stood in the corridor outside the dining room, the crystal glass of red wine balanced on the silver tray in her hands. She had carried trays like this for 7 years. 7 years of silence. 7 years of invisibility. 7 years of watching Seo Jinhyuk rule his empire from a distance so great she sometimes wondered if she existed at all in his world. Her hands were not shaking. That was the terrifying part. She pushed open the dining room door. But let's go back. Because you need to understand who Adaeze Mensah was before that night. Before the poison. Before the choice that would unravel everything, including her own carefully guarded heart. Before we begin, my mum said this video cannot reach 10,000 views and 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Smash that like button, subscribe right now and drop in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's get into this story. Adaeze Kofi Mensah was born in Accra, Ghana. On the same night a thunderstorm knocked out power to 3 districts. Her mother always said that was a sign, that Adaeze came into the world the way she intended to live in it. Loudly, suddenly and impossible to ignore. She was 23 when she arrived in Seoul. She was 23, broke, brilliant, and carrying a forged reference letter that she had written herself, because the woman who was supposed to write it had died 2 weeks before Adaeze's flight, and the universe apparently had absolutely no chill. You forged this, the head housekeeper of the Seo estate, a stone-faced woman named Madame Lim, had said, holding the letter up to the light. I rewrote it. Adaeze had replied calmly, chin lifted, hands clasped behind her back to hide the fact that they were shaking violently. The original was grammatically embarrassing. I was doing everyone a favor. Madame Lim had stared at her for a long, suffocating moment. Then inexplicably she had smiled. Just barely. Just enough. You start Monday, she had said. That was how Adaeze Mensah walked into the most dangerous household in all of South Korea. With a fake letter, a real attitude, and absolutely no idea that the man who owned the estate would one day be the man she would die for. The Seo estate was not a house. It was a declaration. Perched on a hill above the Han River, it sprawled across 12 acres of manicured grounds, marble floors, and a silence so heavy it had its own weight. There were 43 rooms. Adaeze knew because she had cleaned every single one of them. There were 17 full-time staff, 6 rotating security rotations, and 1 golden rule that Madame Lim had delivered on Adaeze's first morning with the severity of someone issuing a death sentence. You do not speak to Mr. Seo unless spoken to. You do not look at Mr. Seo unless required by your duties. You do not exist in Mr. Seo's world. You are furniture. Beautiful, functional, invisible furniture. Adaeze had nodded with great seriousness. She had then, on her very first day, accidentally walked in on Seo Jinhyuk doing a push-up routine in the East Wing gym, wearing nothing but black training shorts, earphones in, completely unaware of her presence. And she had stood there for 4 full seconds before dropping the entire laundry basket she was carrying with a crash so loud it echoed down the corridor. He had looked up. She had looked at him. The most powerful man in the Korean underworld had one eyebrow raised. His chest was, and she would later describe this to exactly no one because she had no friends in Seoul yet, architecturally significant. You're new, he had said. I'm furniture, she had replied, snatching the laundry basket off the floor and walking away with what she felt was enormous dignity. She heard him laugh. Just once. Low, surprised, like it had escaped before he could stop it. She did not turn around. For 7 years that was how it went. She was furniture. He was untouchable. The estate had its rhythms and its rules, and Adaeze was very, very good at her job, because being good at her job meant she got to stay. And staying meant she could keep sending money home to Accra. To her younger sister Alma, who was studying architecture at university. To her mother who had bad knees and worse luck. To the family that was the entire reason she had forged that letter in the first place. She cleaned. She served. She organized. She managed. And sometimes, when the estate was quiet and the hallways were empty, she noticed things. She noticed that Seo Jinhyuk never ate the food his chef prepared on Wednesdays. She noticed that he stood at the west window every morning at 6:47 exactly for 3 minutes looking at nothing. She noticed that he had the same nightmare twice a week. She could tell by the way the lights came on in his private wing at 2 a.m., and that he was always alone when it happened. She noticed that for all his power, all his wealth, all the men who feared the sound of his name, Seo Jinhyuk was the loneliest person she had ever seen. She never said any of this out loud. She was furniture. But furniture, she had learned, sees everything. On the 7th anniversary of her employment, 3 things happened. The first, Madame Lim was found dead at the bottom of the east staircase. The second, Adaeze was summoned for the first time in 7 years to Seo Jinhyuk's private office. The third, the man in the black gloves was waiting for her in the basement when she returned. And in his hand was the vial. The private office of Seo Jinhyuk was exactly what you would expect from a man who ran 3 legitimate corporations as cover for an empire that governments had been trying to dismantle for a decade. Which was to say, it was aggressively beautiful and slightly terrifying. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Dark oak. Leather chairs the color of charcoal. A single desk so wide and so imposing it functioned less as furniture and more as a threat. The kind of desk that said, "I have already won whatever argument you came here to start." Adaeze stood at the door for a moment before knocking. She was 30 years old. She had survived 7 Korean winters for attempted break-ins to the estate. 1 incident involving a rival gang's poisoned cake that she had identified and removed before it reached the dining table. Instincts she had never explained and no one had thought to ask about. And the daily psychological experience of working in close proximity to a man who looked like that. She knocked. "Come in." His voice was low. It always was. The kind of low that didn't need volume to command a room. She entered. Seo Jinhyuk was standing at the window. Not the west window. That was his 647 window, the one she had never asked about. This was the north window which looked out over the main gate, and he was watching the flicker of the police lights still visible at the bottom of the driveway. They had come for Madame Lim. Or rather, they had come for the body that used to be Madame Lim. He didn't turn around when she entered. "Mensah," he said. "Yes, Mr. Seo. How long have you been with this household?" 7 years tomorrow, sir." 7 years. He finally turned. And this was the thing about Seo Jinhyuk at 34. He had always been beautiful in the way that cold, dangerous things were beautiful. Sharp jaw. Dark eyes that processed everything with the stillness of deep water. The kind of face that made terrible decisions feel reasonable. "And in 7 years you have never come to me with information." "Not once." "That wasn't my role." "It is now." He moved to the desk. Saturday. Picked up a folder and slid it across the surface toward her with 2 fingers without looking up. Madame Lim didn't fall. Someone pushed her. Someone in this house. Someone who has been inside this house long enough to know every camera blind spot, every staff schedule, every rotation pattern. Adaeze looked at the folder. She did not reach for it. "And you're telling me this because you know this house better than anyone alive." He looked up then. Directly at her. She had spent 7 years in careful preparation for this exact moment, and her body still did something absolutely unhinged. "Because you notice things, Mensah. You think I haven't noticed that you notice things." A silence stretched between them. "I notice things," she said carefully, "about laundry and inventory and meal schedules. You identified a ricin compound in a dessert 2 years ago. The chef thought it was a powdered sugar irregularity. You flagged it in less than 3 seconds. His voice was perfectly even. "I had it tested. You were right." Her expression did not change. She had spent 7 years learning not to let things show on her face. "I grew up around my aunt's pharmaceutical lab in Accra. I learned to identify certain compounds early. You never mentioned it. You never asked." She paused. "I was furniture." Something shifted in his face. Just barely. Just enough. "You were never furniture, Mensah." He pushed the folder another inch toward her. "I need to know who killed Madame Lim. And I need to know before they try again, because whoever did it wasn't after her. She was a message." "A message to whom?" He looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. "To me," he said. She took the folder home to her room, a modest suite on the 3rd floor that she had quietly transformed over 7 years into something that felt, against all logic, like hers, and she sat on the edge of her bed and opened it. Inside were photographs. Names. Dates. A web of connections so tangled it looked like someone had thrown spaghetti at a conspiracy board and called it evidence. And there, in the bottom right corner of the third page, a name she recognized. Her stomach dropped through the floor. Because the name wasn't a stranger's. It was someone inside the estate. Someone she had eaten breakfast beside for 3 years. Someone she had covered for twice when they were running late. Someone who had, just last week, asked her a very specific question about Mr. Seo's Wednesday schedule. She closed the folder. She sat very still in the dark of her room. And for the first time in 7 years of perfect, practiced composure, Adaeze Mensah was genuinely afraid. The rule she had never broken in 7 years was simple. Do not let him see you as a person. Because people were complicated. People had histories and hungers and feelings that spilled over into spaces where they didn't belong. Furniture didn't complicate things. Furniture just existed quietly and let the humans around it do whatever they needed to do. The morning after the office conversation, Adaeze made a decision. He went back. Not because she was summoned. Not because it was her role. But because she had spent most of the night reading the file, and by 4 a.m. she had 3 separate threads that she was fairly certain the man in that office had missed. And she was constitutionally incapable of sitting on information that mattered. It was a character flaw. Her mother had told her this repeatedly. She knocked at 7 a.m. You weren't called, he said without looking up from whatever he was reading. I know. She sat down across from him. In the leather chair. Without being invited. She watched his jaw tighten slightly and continued before he could speak. Page 17 of the file. You flagged Kwon Hyun-suk as a possible outside contact. He's not outside. He's been inside the estate for 11 months. He has access to the East Wing storage. He is also the one who replaced the West Corridor camera with a nearly identical model 3 months ago. I noticed because the new model has a slightly different lens glare at 6 p.m. when the afternoon light hits it. Silence. Seo Jinhyuk finally looked up. She could not read his expression. She had never been able to, which was frankly its own form of torture. Sit down, he said. I am sitting down. You sat without permission. I brought value-added intelligence. I felt the chair was fair compensation. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. An almost smile. A nearly. He felt it in her sternum like a tuning fork. The camera, he said slowly. You're certain? I've been looking at that corridor for 7 years. I notice when things change. He leaned back in his chair and studied her with an attention she had never had directed at her before. The full beam of Seo Jinhyuk's focus was, she catalogued this clinically and filed it away. A lot. It was a physical experience. Why didn't you come to me sooner? He asked. If you've been noticing things for 7 years. Because noticing things for your own situational awareness is different from inserting yourself into your employer's criminal enterprise. His eyes narrowed slightly. You know what I am. I know what this house is, she said simply. I'm not naive, Mr. Seo. I'm Ghanaian. We are excellent at reading rooms. He was quiet for a moment. Then, and she would think about this moment for a very long time afterward, he smiled. A real one. Not the controlled, weapons-grade expression she had seen him deploy at dinner parties and board meetings. Something smaller and realer and so unguarded it almost looked like an accident. What else did you find? He asked. They spent 4 hours in that office. 4 hours during which Adaeze laid out everything she had pieced together over one sleepless night. And Seo Jinhyuk listened with the focused intensity of someone who was completely unaccustomed to being surprised. And was very clearly being surprised. She had never had his full attention before. She was going to need a minute. They ordered lunch. He ordered lunch by phone with the brief authority of a man for whom ordering things was a foundational life skill. And when the tray appeared, Adaeze looked at the spread and said without thinking, You ordered the kimchi jjigae. You never eat anything from this kitchen on Wednesdays. It's Thursday. Are you hedging? He stopped pouring tea. He set the pot down. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't name. How? He said very quietly, do you know what I eat on Wednesdays? She had the distinct sense she had revealed something she shouldn't have. 7 years, she said with supreme casualness, picking up her chopsticks. I pay attention to inventory. My meal preferences are not inventory. Everything in this house is inventory to me, Mr. Seo. He looked at her for another long beat. Then he picked up his chopsticks. Jinhyuk, he said. She blinked. I'm sorry. My name. If we're going to work together, the formality is inefficient. He looked at her with complete neutrality, as if he had not just detonated something quiet and significant in the center of her chest. Adaeze. He said her name in full. Correctly. With the right emphasis on the second syllable. Most people who had known her for years still got it wrong. How do you know how to pronounce that? She asked before she could stop herself. I looked it up, he said. 4 years ago. 4 years ago. He picked up her chopsticks. She said nothing. But something she had kept behind a very thick wall for 7 very disciplined years shifted in its sleep, and woke up. The problem with becoming useful to Seo Jinhyuk was that it was very, very hard to stop. By the end of that first week, Adaeze had been temporarily, Jinhyuk had said with the kind of finality that suggested temporary was doing a lot of work in that sentence, reassigned from household management to what he called, with zero irony, intelligence consultation. Her new office was a room adjacent to his. Small. Well-lit. Equipped with 3 monitors, access to the estate's full security archive, and a standing desk he had apparently had installed overnight without mentioning it, because she had made one comment about preferring to stand while she worked. She had stared at the standing desk for a full minute when she arrived. It's a standing desk, he had said, passing behind her with a coffee. Not a marriage proposal, Mensah. Don't make it strange. I wasn't making it strange. Your face was making it strange. My face was being normal. Your face, he said without turning around, was doing something very specific that you think is neutral but is not. She had sat down immediately. At the regular chair. Out of pure spite. He had said nothing. But she heard, she was almost completely certain she heard, a sound from the direction of his desk that was suspiciously close to a suppressed laugh. The intelligence work was, and she would admit this only to herself in the quiet of her room at night, the most alive she had felt in years. He had a degree. A real one, not forged. A bachelor's in information systems from the University of Ghana, Legon, that she had never once mentioned because it had not seemed relevant to being excellent at household management. But now, with 3 monitors and 7 years of instinct and a brain that had been quietly, patiently bored, she was in her element. The camera exchange on the West Corridor had been their first break. By following that thread, cross-referencing staff access records with external vendor logs and a very specific pattern of lights Adaeze had noticed in the gatehouse at irregular hours, they had identified 2 more internal contacts. Neither of them was who you would expect. One was a junior security officer who had been with the estate for 3 years. The other was someone in the kitchen. Not a chef. Not the head cook. The person who delivered fresh flowers every Tuesday from the external florist. She's not a florist, Adaeze said, pulling up the footage from 6 different dates on the left monitor. Watch her hands. Every single delivery, she touches the West Corridor window frame. Same spot, same gesture. She's leaving residue for a reader. A contact comes through after hours, lifts the coded trace, and she never has to make a single phone call. No digital signature. Old-school tradecraft. Jinhyuk had leaned over her shoulder to look at the monitor. He was very close. She was aware of this in a professionally inconvenient way. That's Korean black network tradecraft, he said quietly. His voice at this proximity was different. Less boardroom, more something. The kind I killed the last person who used against me. She kept her voice even. And yet here we are, discovering it was under your nose the entire time. Are you enjoying this? I'm professionally engaged. Mensah. Adaeze, she corrected because he had told her to use first names and she was not going to be the only one doing so. And yes. A little. He pulled back. She breathed. He stood behind her at a reasonable distance and they returned to the monitors. The question, she said back in full focus, is who is giving the orders? Because the florist and the guard and Kwan are all mid-level. Their fingers. We need the hand. I know who it is, he said. She turned in her chair. His face was doing something she had never seen before on it. Something that sat between cold fury and a very old, very specific kind of pain. My uncle, he said. The full story of the Seo family was something Adaeze had known in outline only. The estate staff did not gossip about the Seos. Not because they didn't want to, but because those who had tried tended to leave under unusual circumstances. What she knew came from the edges of conversations, the implications of schedules, And the particular way Jinhyuk's voice changed on the rare occasions the name Seo Jinhyuk came through on the phone. Flat. Careful. The voice of someone handling something sharp. Your uncle wants the inheritance, she said. My uncle, Jinhyuk said, wants the Seo seat. The money is secondary. It's always been about the seat. He moved to the window. The north one. My father named me heir over him 12 years ago. He has been patient. Until now. Until now. She turned back to the monitors. Her mind was already moving, connecting threads, filling gaps, building the shape of something she didn't yet have a name for. Then, she said, we need to let him think he's winning. Jinhyuk turned from the window. What? If he's been this careful and this patient, confronting him directly will just push everything underground. He'll go dormant, cut the contacts, wait another 5 years and try differently. She spun her chair to face him. But if he thinks the plan is working, if he thinks he's close, he'll move. He'll make mistakes. He'll expose himself. She tilted her head. We need to run a play. He stared at her. You, he said slowly, are either extraordinary or you're going to give me a headache. Why can't it be both, she said. And this time, the smile that crossed his face was not accidental at all. The plan required a dinner party. Not just any dinner party. A dinner party in which Seo Jinhyuk appeared distracted, slightly unwell and, the critical detail, newly trusting of a household staff member who had been elevated to an unusual position. Which would signal to Seo Jinhyuk that the household was destabilized enough to move, while simultaneously giving them a controlled environment in which to monitor every guest for the trace residue system they had by now fully mapped. In short, Jinhyuk had to look vulnerable. And Adaeze had to look like the reason. I don't like this, Jinhyuk said on the afternoon before the dinner. They were in his office. She was reviewing the guest list on the tablet. He was standing at the window doing his 6:47 thing, except it was 3 p.m. and therefore clearly just a stress response being expressed spatially. You don't have to like it, she said. You have to perform it. I don't perform. You run a criminal empire disguised as 3 separate legitimate businesses. You perform constantly. That's different. How? Pause. That performance has a purpose, he said. So does this one. He turned from the window. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit. He was always in some variation of dark charcoal, which he had a completely neutral and professional opinion about, and his tie was loosened one button. He looked at her with the expression she was beginning to privately call his Adaeze look, which was different from how he looked at everyone else in that it contained a very specific kind of attention she didn't have language for yet. The optics of this, he said carefully, involve implying a personal closeness between us. Yes. You're aware of what my associates will assume. That we're sleeping together? Yes. She held his gaze. Your associates can think whatever they like. The objective is to make your uncle believe you're distracted. The most convincing distraction for a man in your position is a woman he didn't see coming. Another silence. And that doesn't bother you, he said. Jinhyuk. She set down the tablet. I am a 30-year-old Ghanaian woman who has been called furniture in this house for 7 years. Someone assuming I'm sleeping with my employer is, in the grand ranking of indignities available to me, quite mild. She picked the tablet back up. Now your uncle is seated at table 3. I'll be moving through that section twice during pre-dinner drinks. I need you to be watching me when I do it. Visibly. He said nothing for a moment. Then, I can do that. She looked up. He was already looking at her. Good, she said, and returned to the tablet with the serene confidence of a woman who had absolutely not just lost 4 seconds of cognitive function. The dinner party was a masterpiece. Adaeze moved through it the way she had moved through 7 years of this house, with perfect composure and total situational awareness. But tonight she was not invisible. Tonight she was wearing a deep bronze dress she had owned since a Christmas party in Accra 6 years ago and had never had occasion to wear, fitted with a neckline that was formal adjacent to knot. And she had done her locks up in a crown that her mother would have called ceremonial, and she felt for the first time in a long time entirely like herself. The effect on the room was a useful data point. The effect on Jinhyuk when she had walked past his office doorway before the guests arrived. She had noted it, catalogued it, and put it in a very sealed file labeled "Do Not Open During Operation." He had stopped mid-sentence on a phone call. She had kept walking. But the dinner party was also where things went sideways. Because Seo Jinhyuk, who was in his late 50s with the polished surface of a man who had never done anything unrespectable in his life, had looked at Adaeze, really looked at her, and something behind his pleasant expression had shifted. Not suspicion. Something worse. Recognition. She kept her face still as still. She laughed at the appropriate moments. She circulated. She caught Jinhyuk's eye from across the room exactly twice, and the second time she held his gaze a half-second longer than necessary, for the performance, and felt his attention follow her as she moved away. But her mind was running a different calculation. Jinhyuk recognized her. Not personally. She had never met him before tonight. He recognized what she was. He knew she wasn't just staff. Which meant the plan had a hole. She needed to get to Jinhyuk. She found a moment near the end of the evening, used the pretext of bringing him a second drink, leaned close as she set it down, her lips near his ear in the manner of someone sharing something intimate for the performance of it, and murmured, "Your uncle knows I'm not what I appear. We have maybe 48 hours before he recalibrates. We need to move the timeline." He felt him go still. Then his hand, very deliberately, very lightly, settled at her waist. "Just for the room to see. Just for the performance." "Understood," he murmured back. His voice at this proximity did something atmospheric. He straightened. She walked away. She did not look at his hand. She did not think about his hand. She thought about the 48-hour window and absolutely nothing else. She was very, very good at this. She was also, she acknowledged, at 2 a.m. lying awake in her room, absolutely cooked. At 2:17 a.m. on the morning after the dinner party, the lights in Jinhyuk's wing came on. Adaeze was already awake. She lay there for 63 seconds. He counted. She was doing it to see whether she would get up, as if the number would decide it. At 64 she got up. She didn't overthink it. She put on a robe, carried 2 cups of tea she made in the small kitchen off her room, and walked down the corridor to his wing. She knocked. Not the formal knock she used during work hours. Something quieter. The door opened almost immediately. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt and gray sweatpants, and he looked human. That was the only word she had for it. In the context of Seo Jinhyuk, the discovery that he owned sweatpants was significant. He looked at her. At the 2 cups. Back at her. He stepped aside. She came in. His private sitting room was nothing like the office. The office was the performance of power. This room, softer lights, a worn reading chair, books stacked rather than arranged, a throw blanket that had clearly seen real use. This room was the actual man. She sat on the end of the couch and handed him a cup. "You were awake," she said. "I'm awake at this hour most nights." "I know." He looked at her. "You've been watching my wing," he said. Not accusatory. Just noting it. "I notice patterns. It's a problem." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "What is it?" "The dream." A long pause. "What dream?" he said. "The one that turns the lights on twice a week." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not asking you to tell me. I'm asking if it's the same one it's been for 7 years." The silence that followed had a different quality to it. Not guarded, something past that. The silence of someone who had been alone with something for so long they had forgotten it was possible to say it out loud. "My father," he said finally. "The night he was killed. I was 20. I was in the next room." His voice was very quiet and very even. "I dream that I make a different choice. Every time I try a different choice. None of them work." Adaeze said nothing for a moment. Then, "I dreamed about my father for 4 years after he left. Every dream I found a different way to make him stay. None of them worked either." She looked at her tea. "Dreams are just the mind testing the same broken lock." He turned to look at her. Really look at her. "He left," Jinhyuk asked. "When I was 16. Got up one morning and didn't come back. My mother never explained it. I think she couldn't." She paused. "That's the year I started paying very close attention to everything around me. If I could just see it coming, whatever it was, I could stop it. Or at least not be surprised." "Is that why you notice things?" "Probably." She smiled, dry and small. "A Ghanaian therapist would have a field day with me." He was quiet. Then carefully, "And did it work?" "Watching for it." "Not once," she said. "But I've never managed to stop." She looked at him. "I suspect you know the feeling." His jaw moved. Not quite a smile. Something raw. I put cameras in every room, he said. Every corner of this property. I have 7 security rotations. And someone still got to Madam Lim. He set down his cup. Watching for it doesn't work. I know. I've tried it for 14 years. And yet here we both are, she said. Watching. He looked at her with something open on his face that she had never seen there before. Something unguarded in a way that had nothing to do with sweatpants or the hour. Why did you come tonight? He asked. She considered lying. She was good at the contained truth. The version that gave something without giving everything. Because you shouldn't be alone with a lock you've been trying for 14 years, she said. And I've been here 7 years and I have decent tea and it seemed like a waste. He looked at her for a very long time. Then he reached over, took the throw blanket from the back of the couch and dropped it over her knees without commentary and picked his tea back up. They sat in the quiet. They did not sleep. They talked. About his father, about her mother's knees, about Accra in the rain, about a hiking trail outside Seoul he had been to once and forgotten to return to. About the loneliness that was the tax on people who were very good at surviving. At 5 a.m. she stood to go. At the door he said, Adaeze. She turned. Thank you, he said. Plain. Simple. Like someone who almost never said it and meant it the more for that. She nodded. She left. In the corridor, she leaned against the wall for a single moment with her eyes closed and her tea cold in her hands. The sealed file in her mind labeled Do Not Open was very clearly no longer sealed. The 48 hours ran out in 36. She was in the intelligence room when the alert came. The motion sensor at the East Corridor access point triggered at 11 p.m. on a night when every staff member was accounted for. She was on the feed in seconds. He saw the figure. She identified them in 4. She called Jinhyuk. East access. Someone who should not be here. Go to the safe room aisle. No. His voice was flat. Where are you? Intelligence room. Jinhyuk, the safe room. I'm coming to you. He was there in 2 minutes. Black clothing, no jacket. He moved through his own house like a shadow and she had a brief high-definition moment of understanding exactly how he had survived this long. It's Youngjae's contact, she said, pulling up the feed. Not Youngjae himself. A third party we haven't ID'd. She pointed to the figure on screen. They're heading for the kitchen access. Which means they're not here for you, they're here to plant something. The Wednesday food. She looked at him. He knows I won't eat it, Jinhyuk said. He's always known. He's been watching me long enough. Something moved in his eyes. He's not trying to poison me through the food. Then what? She stopped. They looked at each other. He needs someone else to do it, Jinhyuk said quietly. Someone inside. Someone trusted. Her blood went cold. He's going to try to use me, she said. Not a question. You've just been elevated visibly. You have access. You have proximity. Jinhyuk's voice was very careful and very controlled. He's going to approach you. He's going to offer you something. Money, safety, a story. And he's going to give you something to put in my glass. The shape of the next 12 hours assembled in her mind with terrible clarity. So we let him, she said. Adaeze. We let him approach me. I take whatever he gives me. She held Jinhyuk's gaze. It's the only way to catch him with direct evidence. Everything we have right now is trace and inference. It won't hold in any room where he has influence. We need him to hand me the weapon himself. You're describing using yourself as bait. I'm describing being the most useful I can possibly be. That's not. He stopped. His jaw tightened. The controlled exterior held, but she could see very clearly the thing running underneath it. That is not an acceptable risk. It's the only play we have. There are other plays. Name one that catches him before he tries a different angle in 6 months. Name one that doesn't let him go to ground and resurface when we're not ready. She stepped slightly closer. You hired my brain, Jinhyuk. Let me use it. The silence between them was thick. If anything goes wrong, he said. Nothing will go wrong. If anything. I'm Adaeze Mensah, she said. I forged a reference letter to get this job. I identified a ricin compound by sight. I have been outsmarting people who underestimated me since I was 16 years old. She met his eyes. Nothing will go wrong. He looked at her for a long, excruciating moment. Then he nodded. Once. Like a man agreeing to something he already knew he couldn't fight. The man in the black gloves came for her at 9 a.m. the next morning. In the basement. Which was, she noted with professional detachment, elegant tradecraft. Cameras didn't cover the full basement corridor. She had told Jinhyuk this. She had also told Jinhyuk to be watching the one camera that did cover the approach, and to have two of his most trusted security in position. The man was not old. Mid-40s. Careful eyes and the kind of stillness that came from practice. He told her he worked for someone who wanted to help her. That she deserved more than a servant's life. That 7 years of loyalty to a man who saw her as nothing was a waste of someone clearly exceptional. She listened. He told her the offer. A wire transfer. Enough to buy her mother a house in Accra. Enough to fund her sister's education through a master's degree. Enough that she would never clean anyone else's floors again. She listened. He placed the vial in her hand. Red wine, he said. With dinner. Just the one glass. She looked at the vial. She said, and after you leave the estate. Tonight. A car will be waiting. And Mr. Seo? Won't be your concern. She closed her hand around the vial. She looked up at the man. Okay, she said. And that was how Adaeze Mensah walked into the dining room that evening with a crystal glass on a silver tray. And 4 minutes the man had told her before the most powerful man she'd ever known would be dead. Her hands were not shaking. The dining room door swung open. She walked in. Jinhyuk looked up from the head of the table. He crossed the room. She set the tray down. She looked at him. Really looked at him, at the man who had said her name correctly for 7 years without her ever knowing, who had installed a standing desk overnight without mentioning it, who had sat in the dark with her at 2 a.m. and told her about the dream. She picked up the glass and poured it down the drain of the service sink beside the table. In the same moment, the sound of security moving in the corridor. The sound of a door. The sound of Seo Jinhyuk, who had been waiting in the adjacent room to confirm the act, saying something very sharp in Korean that she didn't need to understand to know what it meant. She put the empty glass on the tray. She looked at Jinhyuk. The vial's already bagged and tagged, she said calmly. Your team in the basement has the contact in custody. And your uncle is currently being recorded walking into an adjacent room to witness an assassination he personally commissioned. She tilted her head. I believe that covers direct evidence. Jinhyuk stared at her. The controlled exterior was gone. Whatever was on his face now was completely unguarded, and it was a lot. It was the kind of a lot that made her want to look away, except she absolutely did not. You, he said very quietly, are the most extraordinary person I have ever met. I know, she said. I have been telling this house that for 7 years. And then he was on his feet and she wasn't entirely sure who moved first, but the distance between them was gone and his hands were at her face, and later she would think about the way it felt to be kissed by a man who had been choosing his words very carefully for 7 years. Like a door finally opening. Like something that had been waiting so long it had forgotten it was waiting. She would think about how his hands had held her face as if she was something he intended to keep. How she had grabbed the lapels of his shirt, very sensible under the circumstances, and kissed him back with 7 years of restrained intelligence and professional frustration, which was a combination she did not recommend sitting on for any longer than was necessary. She would also think about the moment they had broken apart, slightly breathless, in the middle of his dining room with the service sink draining beside them, and how he had pressed his forehead to hers and stayed there, eyes closed as if recalibrating. 7 years, he had said. 7 years, she had agreed. I didn't know how to, he stopped. A man who chose words for a living coming up short. She found it devastating. You were furniture, she said. He pulled back enough to look at her. His expression was doing everything at once. You were never furniture, he said. Not for a single day. But all of that was the part she would think about later. Right now there was the matter of Seo Jinhyuk being escorted out of the estate in handcuffs at 9:47 p.m. There was the matter of the 3 other associates who had been flagged by the trace residue intelligence and were being addressed by Jinhyuk's most trusted men across the city. There was the matter of the legal architecture that would need to be assembled to handle the prosecution in a world where the Seo family operated in spaces the regular courts didn't fully reach. There was, in short, an enormous amount of work. Adaeze was sitting at her desk in the intelligence room at 11 p.m., Not the standing desk, she was using the chair. She had earned a chair, going through the final documentation when Jinhyuk appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of tea. She stared at the cups. "I know how to make tea," he said. "I didn't say anything. Your face said something. My face is neutral." "Your face," he said, setting a cup in front of her and sitting in the spare chair, "has never been neutral in your life. It is one of many things about you that I should have said something about 7 years ago." He picked up the tea. It was good. Better than she expected. He filed that away. "What would you have said?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with the full beam of his attention again. She was getting better at staying operational under it, but only marginally. "That you were extraordinary," he said. "From the first day. That I knew it from the laundry basket." Something moved in his expression. "That I was afraid of it." "Afraid of a laundry basket?" "Of you." He said it plainly. "Someone that present. That perceptive. I run my life at a specific distance from people. It's safer. And you saw things. From the beginning." He looked at his cup. "It's easier to keep people at a distance when they're not actually looking at you." "I was looking at you the entire time," she said. "I know," he said. "I know." They sat for a moment with that. "What happens now?" she asked. "Young-jae will be handled. The network he built inside the estate will be dismantled. The estate goes into a different security configuration." He looked at her. "And you, your role here changes. Permanently. Not intelligence consultant." He paused. "I want you here. In whatever capacity you'll agree to. But honestly." "Honestly," she repeated. "Without furniture." His jaw moved. "Adaeze. I'm not good at this. I'm aware of that. I have been told it many times by people I cared about considerably less than." He stopped. "What I'm saying is that I would like the chance to be bad at it with you if you'll let me." She looked at him for a long, warm, delighted moment. "That," she said, "is both the most awkward and most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. I'm choosing to take that as a yes." "You should." She picked up her tea. "You really should." He video called Alma that night. Her sister answered half asleep, hair wrapped, squinting at the phone screen from what appeared to be a library desk in Accra at some unfathomable hour. "You're glowing," Alma said immediately. "Why are you glowing? It's midnight there." "It's 11. You're glowing at 11. This is suspicious." Alma pulled herself upright. "Tell me everything." "There's nothing to tell. Adaeze Mensah, you are a terrible liar and I have known you for 27 years. Go to sleep." "Is it the employer?" "The very Korean very." "Good night, Alma. The one you said is architecturally sig." Adaeze ended the call. She sat in her room. She was undeniably glowing. But here is what Adaeze did not know, could not know, as she sat in her room that night, warm and certain and more hopeful than she had been in 7 years. She did not know that in a secure facility on the other side of Seoul, Seo Jinhyuk was not panicking. He was calm. He was calm because the assassination had always been the cover. The real move, the one nobody in the estate had found in any file, any camera, any trace, was already in motion. There was a second will. A forged one. One that had been placed, 3 years ago with extraordinary patience, inside the legal architecture of the Seo estate. One that named Young-jae as emergency heir under a specific clause. One that required only one condition to be triggered. Proof of mental incapacitation of the primary heir. And the man in the black gloves, the one currently not in custody because the man in the basement had been a different man, a substitute, a piece Adaeze had correctly identified and Young-jae had deliberately sacrificed, was already delivering the documentation to a judge. Documentation that described a man who had become dangerously compromised. By a woman. By a member of his own staff. By an emotional entanglement that had caused him to make irrational security decisions. To elevate an unvetted foreign national to intelligence access. To allow personal feelings to override operational judgment. And that, if reviewed by the right people with the right evidence, could be framed as exactly what Young-jae needed it to be. Jinhyuk didn't know. Adaeze didn't know. But across Seoul, in a room neither of them knew existed, a file was being opened. A file with Adaeze's photograph on the cover. And underneath her photograph, in neat, devastating text, a title. The asset. Not the maid. Not the consultant. Not the woman he kissed in the dining room. The asset. As if she had been placed there. As if the last 7 years had been designed. As if someone had known long before Adaeze herself had, exactly how this story would end. The question, the one that would detonate everything, was whether they were right. To be continued in part 2. Did she know? Was it real? Drop your theory in the comments. And if you need part 2 immediately, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and let's get this to 10,000. Don't let the cliffhanger win.